Okay, here we go. So this week we're talking about the movie industry. There's a bunch of things we can get to before we do that. So first of all, we have a visiting scholar on a Fulbright, which is a very prestigious scholar from outside of the country can come and do work here. And so we have a scholar from China, Fanbing Zhang. I'm going to ask the pronunciation of his name before he visits with us. Doing a really interesting talk about the relationship between social media and citizen participation. So I am offering extra credit to students who will attend class in person on May 3rd. So right here, the usual thing, coming in, but instead of streaming or not being here, come on in, make up to 20 points of extra credit, and all you have to do is attend and learn. And a very short one paragraph feedback, something that we can send to Dr. Zhang, who is an associate professor in College of Journalism and Communication at Henan University in China. In order to attend, we're opening this up to the whole campus community, and I'm even going to publicize it at San Francisco State. So if you'd like to attend, click on the red link. This is on the home page, and there's a little Google Doc to fill in. Just say you want to come. So that way, because there's only 35 seats here, they want to know, and they want to save some for our class. So if you click on there and let them know that you'll be attending, that's great. Then they'll know how many other people they can welcome from outside. Hey, Ivan, that they can welcome from outside of our group. Ivan, I'm just mentioning an extra credit opportunity. I've been announcing it by email and such, but on May 3rd, we're having a visiting scholar. If you come to class, then you can get up to 20 points of extra credit. And we ask that you register just because we're going to try to get other people from outside the class in on that day too. So that would be great. And anybody streaming, hey Arnold, you'll hopefully be able to sign up for this extra credit, okay? In terms of assignments, classwork, we have a kind of fun little thing coming up. Not one of our we have a research paper coming up too. I'll get onto that in a sec, but that's not the fun little thing. So we've got an online discussion coming up, due on May 1st. And so this one's for credit. It's not extra credit, so you actually want to get this done. Just a few questions, a little discussion about movie content, genres, types of movies. This is like a little online discussion. You could weigh in anytime you want between now and May 1st and hopefully read a few things that other people have written. This is a great way if people who have been streaming, haven't been able to come into class. It's a good way to kind of interact beyond chat, which I have not been doing a good job of bringing chat comments in here. But so this one's about movie types. Movie theaters and movie-going experience have been fairly immune to challenges from other media. Movies flourished during the Great Depression, held their own when television came on the scene, competing for audience, and have weathered the storms of home videos, cheap DVDs, blockbusters on cable, and now the ease of access with digital technology. Through it all, we still go to the movies. We make that trek out of the house and to the theater, pay high ticket prices, scarf down bad popcorn. Why? What is it about going to the movies that appeals so strongly to the audience? Is it really about the movie itself, or the concessions, the social aspect, or family traditions, or just the ability to step out of your own world and lose yourself in a darkened cinema space for a few hours? What movie genres, in other words, content types like horror films, westerns, sci-fi films, romantic comedies, etc. Which ones would you get out to see? Why do you go to the movies? Stuck for ideas? There's a really nice little online essay from a famous movie critic named Pauline Kael was there. So let's just get a sense before we start talking about the history of movies and stuff. Anyway, like who's been to a movie lately? Is it as much as you used to go? Is it what are your considerations about movies now? Anybody want to share last time they were to a movie? Dylan?
I think the last time I went to the movie was probably 8 months ago or something like that.
That's a long time.
So it's been a while, but I try to go to see like movies that seem good and that I think are going to be nominated for Oscar.
Okay.
Something like that, just because I like watching like at least like critically acclaimed movies.
Yeah.
So.
What was the last one you saw? Just. Or one of those critically acclaimed ones that stands out, even if it wasn't the very last one.
I don't know.
Did anyone see Get Out? Did you see Get Out?
I watched that one. Yeah, I wasn't a big fan of it.
Really?
But it was. I like. Yeah, it was an interesting movie for sure. Like the whole concept. But
Yeah.
I'm not a big genre of those kind of like.
You're not a horror. So horror doesn't get you out.
Like it was much more extensive than that, which was interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It built in a whole kind of satire on race relations.
Exactly,
Creepy satire, I guess. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
much so.
Blacker than Black Mirror, I'd say. Whoa. And there's even a poor taste pun in there too, I guess. Yeah. Folks, other people, did anyone go see a recent, did anyone see Black Panther? Did anyone see, Ivan, you saw it? Do you like it?
It was good. It was a good, I really liked the cinematography.
I haven't seen it yet. I've seen all the associated commercials and trailers and stuff.
I was surprised. I'm not a big, super Marvel movie cinematic universe fan.
So what brought you out to that one?
Well, my friends.
Okay.
And
So there's part of that social aspect, if not family, Trish, but the social aspect got you out, yeah.
I hardly have a social life outside of work, school.
I'm sorry to hear that.
It happens. So it was just like a chance to get together with my friends that I don't get to see a lot.
Yeah,
Just go watch a movie, and whatnot.
That film has a social profile that kind of got a lot of people interested. Is that maybe why your group of friends wanted to go see it, or more?
They're big Marvel fans.
Oh, cool. Okay. Yeah.
Just thought I'd kind of tag along.
Cool. Dylan? Yeah.
Have you seen the new Wes Anderson film?
No, it's an animated, stop-motion animated film. I've heard about it. I love Isle of Dogs, right?
Yeah.
Isle of Dogs.
It looks really interesting.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of his work?
I do love some of his films, the Royal Tenenbaums.
Oh, yeah.
The
Life Aquatic.
that one I found a little too off the wall. That was just kind of crazy. The Grand Budapest Hotel.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
I think I like the more kind of dynasty, family, soapy, and admittedly audience-friendly of the Wes Andersons.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of weirder he gets. I liked the previous animation, the Mr. Fox.
Mr. Fox.
Yeah,
That's a great one.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I dabbled in stop-motion animation after I got out of school. Took me a year and a half to make an 8-minute long animated.
Oh wow. That's awesome.
I never thought of doing it again, but I'm really impressed with the technique. I mean, people who do that, it takes forever.
Oh yeah.
How about some of our other student friends? When was the last time you guys went to movies? Nicole, you don't remember?
You mean like movie theaters?
Yeah, like movie theater. Yeah.
Well, it's been like a long time because usually we're like for me, I'm saving money.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the next one I'll be going to is this Friday, which is the upcoming Avengers movie. So yeah, I guess.
Sorry, which movie are you going to see?
Avengers: Infinity War.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess that'll be the latest one.
All right.
It's coming up for me.
Are you a fan of the superhero movies genre?
Yeah, I mean I've been following Marvel since like 2009, so.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty, I guess.
Yeah.
A fan of superhero movies in general.
Yeah. Cool. Arnold, you gonna see a movie? We have seen a movie recently or anything? No. Not interested, or do you watch them at home instead?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just Netflix.
Netflix. Okay. Yeah. Cool. And then Arthur? Is it, or is it not Arthur? It is, thank you. Movie times? Oh, okay. And what, can you think of a comedy you saw a while ago?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
About 2 years ago.
Oh, wow, that's a while back. I mean, I say that, but I go see films with my kids now, but I don't really go to see myself. But I do, you know, try to keep up a little bit, hear what's out there. Sarah, did you go see any movies recently?
I've seen a lot of movies between December and January.
Because there was holiday period or something? Or? Oh,
Because
okay.
I had some more time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was great.
Yes? Are you
Wow.
cinema buff? You like cinema movies?
I'm very picky for, and I don't like, I mean, especially American Hollywood things.
The Hollywood
or
product
my
type of thing,
things,
yeah.
so
Uh,
I don't care if they are nominated for anything, if I don't feel that. Because mostly you know which kind of movie you are going to see, and I think one of the last one that I've seen is I, Tonya.
oh, okay.
It's a good film.
I liked it a lot.
Yes? Yeah.
Good film.
Yeah.
Cool. That's I remember
think I'm
that bit of
getting
history.
More picky since I'm studying this thing. Now I don't know if it's a good thing or not, because
You know how it's all
not
made.
just the story, it's also the technique, and I'm like, oh, you know, this sound, or this,
I
ah!
know. I remember that myself, like taking an editing class and then going to see a movie in the middle of the editing class. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
It's not that I complained. I was just super aware of every edit.
But the problem is that at one point you have to stop your. There is one point that I say myself, okay, stop.
Enough analysis, just get into the
But
story.
it's very difficult because I think that now it's like muscle memory.
I see. Yeah.
Like it's not
You
that
turned
easy.
you turned on that nerve, right?
It's
But-
not that you want to, but it's just.
Yeah. But do you guys think, or do you think, Sarah, being in a movie theater, does that help you jump into it more profoundly than if
Yes.
you were watching on TV? Or
Yes.
yeah, me too.
And
It's
in
more
December
immersive.
in particular, which one is? I went to a movie and I decided to go just because it was on IMAX. Which
Yes.
one was that? And
Was it Blade Runner? I mean, Blade
Runner.
was,
Yes,
Yeah, they
I
was
was
just
like,
surviving
I want to
through
go
Christmas.
even for the experience
Oh,
of.
Great film.
Yeah.
And it changes a lot.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
Sure.
I'm not a big fan of VR, and so like films that are
Uh-huh.
with.
I haven't even had a
But
chance.
like even deciding to go and watch an IMAX.
Yeah. I didn't make it, but that was the one that I came closest to
Wow.
making it for. Although apparently it was real long, which can be tough for old guys, but it.
I think it was really nice.
I mean, it's a director that I love from my hometown. Believe it or not, how strange. And which is, I mean, it's pretty amazing for a guy from Montreal to become like the director of Blade Runner, and you know, a lot of talent, that guy. But those conditions of projection, that's the thing. A huge screen, super beautiful, you know, image, sound.
Everything is so clear. I mean, you know, it's nice to see when films when you are at home, but it's not the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, absolutely true. Yeah.
Unless you are in a day that people are always talking, which I hate.
Oh yeah, that's bad.
That is a big problem. Sometimes I prefer to wait, you know, and not to go in the beginning.
If the
'Cause
place
in
is
the
too
beginning,
full.
it's like too full, and people are like just, you know, they are the people that want to see it 1st and so they are the one that talk more during
know.
the movie, and
I know.
I don't like it.
There's a lot of distractions about that. Unless the movie is so bad that the people watching it are more entertaining than the movie itself. But then we don't usually go to those anymore. But yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys have plenty to write about for this thing. So don't forget that it's up there for 25 points. And like I said, it's not extra credit, so can't opt out of this one. But it is supposed to just be fun to write about. That's all. Yeah. Okay, so that one's due May 1st, and you just write online and discuss and read with what everyone else writes, hopefully. Although in some classes I build in points for that, but I just left it open for this. Okay, cool. So that's up there for you guys. You know there's the extra credit, which could be 20 points just by coming to class on May 3rd and reserving your seat by clicking on that link that's on the home page, okay? So that's just out here. If you just click on this link, you get through to this little thing where you say, I want to come. And so that would be great. And then, oh dear, okay, let's just get into student view for this one. Let us take just a quick first look at our final term paper topics, which, like the last one, are assigned, but we can talk over what's in them, the different possibilities of them. Let's see. Well, let's just start on the first one today. I wanted to, I know not everyone will be here at every class. I just wanted to look over these topics and just talk about what each one entails, give you an idea, and then you can start to figure out which one you want to work on. So let's look at the first one. And remember, it's like the first research essay. You're writing, you're writing an argument. You're trying to persuade us of stuff, right? And you're using facts from the textbook as ammunition to kind of back yourself up. And if you don't have any facts from the textbook, it's not a good thing. You won't do as well. But you also just want to try to say something that's, that you want to say about all this. So this one is one that it involves, a little bit of research, but then the writing of it is less of an argument and more about kind of a report about what you saw. So this one asks you to look at 3 different programs of 3 different types on 3 different stations. So trying to be as diverse as possible. Meaning, you watched a sports event on ESPN, you watched a sitcom on CBS, you watched, a feature film on Netflix or, something like that, an original Netflix or, whatever, as long as it's widely spread. And I guess Netflix wouldn't work too well for this because I'm asking you, what advertisements did you see? So you're looking at three different ones. Catalog the advertising on each show. What that means is just as you're watching, note down what the advertisements were for. And so they're just spots. So you could just number them out and then just write down who are the advertisers. And try to figure out if they are national spots, local ads, or network ads as well. So by meaning that, look at it if it's Toyota, but then if it's, like local restaurant, number 1, this is, this would be a local spot. This would definitely be a national spot. So try to say, where you think they come from. And then it says here, discuss the trends you see in the type of advertising presented and what it says about the target audience for each program. So a little bit like we did in our advertising analysis, where we took a product and then we pitched it, but we had to have an idea of who our target was when we pitched it. Same thing here, try to understand from the program, from the network maybe, from the program, who is the target audience, and then connect that to the advertisements. So, if you were watching a show, let's see, what are our examples here? All these are all kind of old folks examples, but the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News, you'd definitely be looking for an older audience, and you'd be looking at the ads that were sold around that. Just trying to say, okay, this makes sense. It's, O'Reilly draws an older conservative audience, and look at the ads that I'm seeing. They're for older conservative people. So only discuss a couple of ads from each program. that give you specific clues about the target audience. So even if there's like 15 ads that are on during the show, you know, just focus through and say, oh, you know, local restaurant number one was of interest because it was a family restaurant, and you know, it was screening against a show on ABC Family, which I don't think exists anymore, but the equivalent of it. And so you're basically, you know, connecting the show, the advertiser, and the audience in their specifics, you know, and pick a couple of the best examples from each show, you know. And remember, when I say you're connecting, remember the show, the advertiser, and the audience. Remember that little diagram we used to draw, which was, you know, producers and advertisers. We're really doing that again, but we're just using that to analyze what we're seeing. So questions about this one? It's not a huge argument. The argument is already there for you. It's kind of like, you know, advertisers will pick shows that target the audiences they want to reach, and they'll produce, you know, spots that would appeal to them. So you're just trying to demonstrate that with some good examples chosen that way. Anybody thinking of doing this one? You want to see what your other options are, right? Well,
I mean, I would. I just don't have live television.
oh, you don't?
No.
Oh, well, that makes this one difficult. Yeah.
Me too.
Yes? Okay, well, it's going to have to be something else, I guess. How could you get it would be, I mean, you'd have to go to a friend's house or something.
Yeah, I don't even know someone who has live TV.
Oh boy, it's time to change this question.
Yeah.
I prefer to have live TV, but that's not an option for me right now.
Cord cutters. It's yeah, it's expensive. Okay, well, not for you guys, I guess. But this is a fun one because it's mostly observation and analysis.
Yeah, it seems
And then,
cool.
you know, you choose your good examples, and then you just talk up this connection between the different elements. Okay, well, next class we'll look at more of these and get another sense of that. Let's see. The other thing, I'm not set up today. I should bring in the quiz and review with you your quiz results. So maybe on Thursday I'll do that. But if you have any questions about, you know, the quiz or whatever, we can look it over then. But I need to have the questions ready to show you as well as your results and stuff. So we'll see. Okay. Research paper is out. Online discussion is out. So we're going for the movie business, which is a venerable old business. Well, let's set this thing up with one of these. Let's start off on the silent era, a movie, and then we can take a look at some PowerPoints and stuff. Okay. This one is. These are good, great series, but they move pretty fast.
Hollywood, here we come. The glamour, the celebrities, the scandals. I'm not talking about Bennifer or Brangelina. Are they still things?
No.
Oh, I'm kind of out of touch. But I'm not out of touch with the golden age of silent cinema when stars rose and fell, studios perfected the mass production of films, and American movies dominated the global film market. In some ways, it was very different from the Hollywood we know today. Movie studios wielded enormous power. They kept stars and directors under tight control, the movies they made were silent, and a ticket would set you back a whopping 10 or 25 cents. On the other hand, a lot of the patterns set during this time still seem awfully familiar today. Studios marketed films on the power of their stars. Genres like gangster movies and romantic comedies took hold and flourished, and audiences craved gossip about the private lives of celebrities. To understand the world as it is, sometimes you have to go back to where it all began. And for Hollywood, that's the silent era. Film was going in a lot of different directions after the First World War. In Germany, filmmakers drew on the Expressionist movement to manipulate their film's mise-en-scène, creating groundbreaking horror films. In Russia, Soviet filmmakers were using cinema to perfect the art of propaganda through revolutionary editing techniques. And in the US, the Hollywood studio system was positioning itself to dominate the rest of the world. Within film studios, the entire filmmaking process took place, from conceiving, writing, and shooting the films to marketing and distribution. The studios had chosen California for its film-friendly sunny weather, its proximity to all kinds of terrain, and its distance from Thomas Edison, who spent much of the 1910s fighting for control of the American film industry from his base in New Jersey. In the early days of the silent era, 3 film studios ruled them all: the famous Players Lasky Corporation, which would eventually become Paramount Pictures, Lowe's Inc., which began as a theater chain, and First National Pictures. Not only did these 3 dominate the marketplace, they exercised near complete control over the creative and personal lives of their stars, writers, and directors. Filmmakers often had to choose between following the studio's orders or abandoning their careers. Then, 4 of the most powerful figures in early silent cinema came together to create their own film studio. In 1919, 2 directors, Charlie Chaplin and D.W. Griffith, and 2 stars, Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford, founded United Artists. Their goal was to give filmmakers more control over their films and a greater percentage of the profits. Cha-ching! Is what I assume they would say. Of course, not many filmmakers could afford to go out on their own like that, so the contract system would continue for several more decades. In 1924, the most powerful studio emerged when Lowe's purchased Goldwyn Pictures and Louis B. Mayer Productions to create Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, better known as MGM, which led to MGM Studios, which led to Tower of Terror, and if you've been on Tower of Terror, that's a pretty fun time. This is a process that would get repeated throughout the 1920s and 1930s as studios merged or sold or split apart, probably because it was the Prohibition and they didn't have anything else to do. By the end of the era, most American films were being made at studios whose names you might recognize from the multiplex today. Not only United Artists and MGM, but also Warner Brothers, Fox, Universal, and Columbia Pictures. Now, while the corporate structure of these companies kept changing, the process by which they were making films was becoming remarkably stable and efficient. Unlike me. The major studios became very good at churning out large-scale commercial movies with mass appeal. One of the leading innovators in setting up the way studios worked was a man named Thomas H. Ince. Like D.W. Griffith, Ince came to film as a failed actor. He directed his first film in 1910, and by 1913, he was making as many as 152 reelers a year. His biggest impact on film came by applying the lessons of mass production to the actual making of movies. Prior to Ince, most films were overseen by a director-cameraman, a single person who conceived the story, worked with the actors, and operated the camera. Ince broke those roles into separate jobs: a screenwriter to conceive the story and write the script, a director to make creative decisions on set and work with the actors, an editor to assemble the footage, a producer to supervise the project from inception to final cut, and a studio head to oversee the entire studio. While other filmmakers had played around with these roles, it was Ince who standardized them into a system still used today. By 1912, he earned enough money to buy a ranch west of Hollywood where he built his own studio, a place he called Inceville. Yep. It was here where the first permanent exterior sets were built, made to resemble far-flung locations like a cowboy saloon, a little Swiss street, or a Japanese village. And as Ince worked to define the roles and streamline the means of production, he was able to triple the output of his studio. Though he died quite young in 1924, Ince's impact on film production was thorough, widespread, and lasting. Now, Max Sennett, another early film mogul and one-time partner of Ince, was responsible for discovering a whole slew of film legends whose names you might recognize. People like the Keystone Cops, Fatty Arbuckle, Gloria Swanson, Carol Lombard, W.C. Fields, and the great Charlie Chaplin. Let's talk a little bit about Charlie Chaplin. He was born into poverty in England in 1889. He went into acting, signed with a prestigious vaudeville touring company, and set off for America at age 19. A film talent scout spotted him there, got him hired by Sennett, and the rest is history. That we're going to talk about, because we're talking about film history. Smart, curious, and driven, it didn't take long for Chaplin to develop his iconic tramp persona and begin directing his own films. After finishing his first film contract, Chaplin struck an extremely lucrative deal with the Chicago-based S&E Studios to make 14 short films. While at S&E, he found ways to combine his finely tuned sense of empathy and his recognizable tramp character with a growing ability to make audiences laugh, through both physical comedy and increasingly clever storylines. In fact, he was so popular that by the time his S&E contract was up in 1915, he negotiated an almost unprecedented salary of $10,000 per week with another studio, the Mutual Film Corporation. They also paid him a signing bonus of $150,000, the equivalent of about $3.5 million today. Cha-ching is what they would have said at the time. The movies Chaplin made with Mutual brought him international stardom. They marked the first time his focus on the poor verged into social criticism, a place silent comedies rarely, if ever, went. True to his roots, and despite being one of the highest paid people in the world, Chaplin's films often focused on the gentle, accidental heroism of the downtrodden. Time and again, he made the powerful the butt of his jokes and displayed tremendous empathy for the poor and the humble. Then in 1919, at age 30, he co-founded United Artists in an effort to exercise greater control over his films. I'm 36. I better get moving. What followed was a string of classic movies that rank not only among Chaplin's best, but among the best film comedies of all time. The Kid, his first feature film and smash hit, The Gold Rush, City Lights, Modern Times, and his controversial takedown of Adolf Hitler, The Great Dictator. His later career would be hampered by legal problems and socialist sympathies, which would land him on the infamous post-war blacklist and keep him from making films. But at his height, no one benefited more from the silent era studio system than Charlie Chaplin, as a director making a lot of films quickly and efficiently, and as an actor commanding enormous salaries and unheard of creative control. And he wasn't the only one to turn the system to his advantage. Actor-directors like Buster Keaton, Fatty Arbuckle, and Harold Lloyd achieved great success making their own short and feature-length comedies. Stars like Mary Pickford and Gloria Swanson parlayed their celebrity into tangible behind-the-scenes power. Now, as film became more and more central to popular culture, some people started to get nervous. They worried that movies posed a real threat to public morality. They saw films promoting materialism, cynicism, and sexual license. This would be a debate that would come up again and again in American culture about movies or music or video games, until now when we've solved all those problems. Is the medium causing society's problems or just reflecting them? A few real-life Hollywood scandals at the time tipped the scales, bringing on the first real self-censorship of American cinema. The gossip press fed readers stories about stars dealing with addictions, affairs, and worse. The most famous of these centered around Fatty Arbuckle, who was accused of the rape and accidental death of an actress named Virginia Rapé. Although he was ultimately acquitted after 3 highly publicized trials, the scandal itself all but ended Arbuckle's career and left an opening for a government crackdown on immorality in films and the film business. Rather than wait for Congress to get involved, the major players in the film industry banded together to form the MPPDA, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America. They hired a retired postmaster general named Will Hayes, a conservative evangelical, to prove they were serious about cleaning up their act. And that's exactly what Hayes did in 1930, putting together the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hayes Code, a catalog of things filmmakers could and couldn't show on screen. Fun. The code also suggested a strategy called compensating values. The idea was that films could show characters engaging in vice for most of the film as long as virtue triumphed in the end. No one employed this technique better than director Cecil B. DeMille. He was a master at giving the audience all the vice and excess they could handle for the first 3/4 of the movie before virtue came out on top. Other filmmakers found their own ways around the Hayes Code. German director Ernst Lubitsch came to Hollywood in 1922 and made a successful series of witty sex comedies that relied on suggestion and innuendo rather than skin. For many of these filmmakers, however, the Hayes Code was about to become the least of their worries. A seismic event was poised to shake up Hollywood, and not every filmmaker of the silent era was going to come out the other side with their career intact. The world was about to get its first taste of synchronous sound, and it tasted good. I don't know. Today we explored the silent era, the first golden age of Hollywood filmmaking. We learned about the innovations of Thomas Ince and the rise of the American film studio. And we discussed some of the most important silent era filmmakers and how their scandals, both real and imagined, led Hollywood to institute industry standards governing the content of their films. Next, we'll tackle the biggest shift in the history of film yet, as movies find their voice. As Crash Course Film History is produced in association with PBS Digital Studios. You can head over to their channel to check out a playlist of their latest amazing shows like The Art Assignment, Gross Science, and PBS Infinite series. This episode of Crash Course was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney studio with the help of these industry standards, and our amazing graphics team is Thought Cafe.
There we go. Crash Course, man. That's fast, right? Hard to beat that in terms of speed. Any fun takeaways from that for you guys? Oh, I've already taken that down. Has anyone seen a Charlie Chaplin film from beginning to end?
Not from the beginning.
Not from beginning to end. Check out Modern Times, I think, or The Great Dictator is really amazing. But it's amazing. It's truly amazing. A lot of what they did then is just as touching today. It's kind of amazing. Like 100 years later, it communicates so well. But I guess art does, doesn't it? Let's see. We've been talking about So the Hayes Code is a real landmark in film history scholarship. That's the code set up to regulate the kind of salacious content that was out there. They don't show any clips. I won't go looking for them, but there was some barely clad bodies, and there's a lot of surprisingly frank physical human imagery, let's say, that was pretty much wiped out by the Hayes Code. Hayes was like the postmaster general, right? Not the most likely person to be a culture czar, but there it was. So this was, we talked about U.S. broadcasting as being, the television stations, they have their standards and practices, but they're basically sort of self-policing entities as well. So U.S. communication media is big on self-censorship, if you want, or self-regulation anyway. So the studios enforced the code, but it was largely the achievement of the studios themselves to police themselves in terms of content. But they also, they do also mention the blacklist era of the 40s and 50s, which definitely changed a lot of careers in Hollywood, definitely affected the movie industry as well from outside. And I think our next video has more to say on that, so we shouldn't go too much into that. 1939, one of the best years for movies ever. Gone with the Wind, The Wizard of Oz. They're not just the two of them as well. It's an amazing year for movies. Point here being, though, that movies have really sustained themselves through economic ups and downs, as well as the competition eventually posed by television, too. So they've managed to, just the way radio has survived, movies has too, and that's what seems kind of amazing still, that people are going to the movie theaters to see these bigger, maybe more spectacular projections than they can get at home. But it has survived, and the way it survived largely is, through better sound, better screen, or bigger screen, or more immersive feeling, 3D, enhanced sound. So a lot of that is designed just to keep people coming back to the movie theaters. And then, when TV was a small screen affair, it was good for intimate stories, but not for great big films. So the censorship of the Hays Code eventually fell away to the MPAA ratings. So films being rated R or X to restrict the content. Another thing that we saw was the United Artists. The original studio driven by filmmaker artists, Fairbanks, Griffiths, Chaplin, Mary Pickford. So they were stars with the power, but creators with the talent as well to sustain that type of a studio. So, we saw that bounce back again in the 1970s. Filmmakers like Coppola, Martin Scorsese, goes on. In the Bay Area, there was Philip Kaufman at that time. And of course, Lucas, George Lucas, heard of him? Yeah. They were the breakout creators who signaled really the end of the studio system that grew up in the silent era. So, that launches a period that we're still in where, the movie industry as a set of production companies is eclipsed by the movie industry as a network of celebrity performers and talent agents, basically, and producers who can put together projects. And the massive amounts of money that takes, which comes from all sorts of investors now, rather than just the Louis B. Mayers or the studio heads. Putting together movies now is incredibly expensive, and there's more slides on that later in all of this. Well, let's dip back into another high-speed round of history, and we could go to the Golden Age, or we could go. I think maybe we should go to the Golden Age. So we're going to skip over the early experiments and successes of sound. It may recap a little bit on the Golden Age of Hollywood, but sound was made a huge change in films. In part film production was kind of frozen in its tracks as the camera had been able to move pretty well during the silent era. You could pick weird angles, you could move the camera, you could do interesting storytelling with the camera. But when sound came about, everything had to kind of get locked down for a little while so that sound could be recorded at the same time as the pictures. Eventually they unlocked that, but it took a while. So sound was really popular with audiences, but it was also, unpopular with movie theater owners because they didn't want to have to put the sound playback equipment in. And also maybe aesthetically a little bit slowed cinema down for a while. Anyhow, let's have a look at Golden Age.
When I say Hollywood, you probably think of big budget movies, star-studded premieres, and studios with giant backlots pumping out film after film. Most of those associations really began sometime between the 1920s and the 1950s. Once audiences could hear actors speak, listen to pre-recorded musical scores, and enjoy sound effects, film cemented its place as the main medium for mass communication, art, and commerce. And as important as Hollywood was during the silent era, nobody could compete after the arrival of sound. New major film studios emerged, each with their own style and favorite celebrities. Before George Clooney and Jennifer Lawrence, there was Clark Gable and Janet Leigh. This cascade of films led to more technological innovations too, like color film and the widescreen formats we still use today. This was the golden age of Hollywood. Hollywood. Ba-ba-da-ba-da. Okay, I'll stop. After the stock market crash in October of 1929, most parts of the American economy took a real hit, but not Hollywood. And at the height of the Great Depression in 1933, roughly a quarter of the American workforce couldn't find a job, and millions of others were barely making ends meet. So you'd think that the last thing people would do with their hard-earned money was go to the movies. And yet, the Depression was one of the best things to happen to the American film business. That's depressing. In fact, more films were released by the major studios during the 1920s and 30s than any other decade, averaging about 800 a year compared to less than 500 per year today. It was cheaper to go to the movies than a play or a concert, and cinema became a means of escape. As we've talked about, films are an illusion of reality, and that illusion was super attractive to people whose day-to-day reality was often pretty bleak. Genre films became more popular, things like gangster films, musicals, westerns, and screwball comedies. Anything to take people's mind off their own struggles and celebrate good old American values of optimism, resilience, ambition, and courage. At the height of Hollywood's golden age, 5 film studios ruled the town. All 5 were vertically integrated, just like the major studios of the silent era. They each had their own distinct reputations and focused on different kinds of films. First up, we have Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, which was the biggest studio in the 1930s. Louis B. Mayer ran MGM with his business partner, Irving Thalberg. Mayer was the savvy businessman of the two. He approved the budgets and oversaw the distribution and marketing. Thalberg, on the other hand, was a former producer and the mind behind the stories and actual production. Together, they made slick, big-budget musicals, comedies, melodramas, and literary adaptations, sparing no expense on sets, costumes, extras, and the biggest movie stars. Think of The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, and Mutiny on the Bounty. I'm talking opulence, people. Next is Paramount Pictures, which was known as the most European studio because they lured a lot of filmmakers away from Germany and the UK. They also gave these filmmakers more leeway to put their own stamp on movies. Hits like Shanghai Express, The Sign of the Cross, and Morocco. Our third player, Warner Brothers, branded itself as the studio of the working class. They churned out low-budget melodramas, gritty gangster movies like The Public Enemy with James Cagney, and musicals set in the Depression like Footlight Parade with James Cagney. The fourth major studio was 20th Century Fox, which made its reputation thanks to its chief director and its most profitable star, not James Cagney. The director was John Ford, who won back-to-back Best Director Oscars for The Grapes of Wrath and How Green Was My Valley, while Shirley Temple sang and danced her way through a string of wholesome hits. And lastly, RKO was the home of the extremely popular Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers musicals. Can I do a dance number, Nick?
Yep.
RKO also took a lot of chances, producing everything from Howard Hawks' screwball comedy Bringing Up Baby to the 1933 version of King Kong, and one of the most influential films of all time, Citizen Kane. Never heard of it. Now, all 5 of these studios dominated the production, distribution, and exhibition of films, for a while. But a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1948, along with the coming of television, signaled a major turning point. In the case, known as United States versus Paramount Pictures, the government argued that the major studios were in violation of antitrust laws. In other words, by owning both the production studios and the movie theaters, they were exercising an unfair monopoly and stifling competition. The Supreme Court agreed and forced the studios to break up their business, sell their theaters, and focus on just production and distribution. Hollywood continued to lead the global film market for another 10 or 15 years, but that near complete control over the industry was ending. We'll talk a lot more about this next time. Now, the golden age of Hollywood saw some major technical leaps in the film business too, including Color. Filmmakers have been experimenting with color since the dawn of cinema. The earliest techniques involved hand-tinting individual frames, a painstaking process that had to be repeated for each print of each film. Not great. Over the next few decades, engineers found ways to use stencils to tint films much faster. They also developed other means of adding color, like bathing the film stock in dyes that fit the mood of the scene, called toning. Red for violence, blue for sorrow, green for grassy. By the mid-1920s, nearly 90% of Hollywood films were either tinted, toned, or some combination of the two, which was great, except color itself looked wildly artificial. And once Hollywood converted to sound on film technology, the tinting interfered with the film stock's ability to record proper sound. Crash course film history. TLDR, it's hard. So filmmakers needed to figure out color cinematography, capturing color with the image. As early as 1861, a Scottish physicist named James Clerk Maxwell, who we talked about in Crash Course Physics, well, I didn't, Shinny did, built the foundations of color photography. The light all around us is made up of a spectrum of different wavelengths, some of which we see as visible colors. Knowing this, Maxwell figured out that all these colors can be derived from some combination of red, yellow, and blue. Beginning in 1906, artists and engineers tried for 15 years to use this technology to achieve color cinematography. But, much like me in high school, they kept failing. Their experiments were unreliable or too expensive. Then, along came Technicolor. In 1922, the Technicolor Corporation saw its first success with a special beam-splitting camera that could make two separate negatives. The light entered the camera and was split into different wavelengths, just like how sunlight hits a prism and splits into a rainbow. Half continued straight ahead, while the other half was diverted 90 degrees to produce two film negatives. These negatives were chemically treated, dyed either red or blue, and cemented together. Then you could run that final film strip through a regular projector, and voila! Even though they weren't spot on, the colors in these films were more reliable and accurate than any of the earlier attempts. And while that beam-splitting camera was expensive, at least theaters didn't have to buy new projectors to show color films. Over the next decade, Technicolor expanded its system into a three-color process, with a camera that recorded the original image into three separate negatives, red, blue, and green. And by 1932, this process created such high-quality, vibrant results that Technicolor ended up with a virtual monopoly on color film for the next 20 years. Throughout the 1930s, filmmakers and studios gradually began playing around with Technicolor. By the middle of the decade, producer David O. Selznick turned a corner by casting big stars in color films for the first time. And as the 1930s came to a close, Hollywood released a series of high-profile hits that proved color was here to stay. These films that used Technicolor range from the Errol Flynn swashbuckler The Adventures of Robin Hood to classics like The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, and even animated features like Disney's Snow White and Pinocchio. Advances in color cinematography would continue to develop over the years, but the basics stayed the same until film stock gave way to digital video in the 21st century. Now, a third technical element of cinema was standardized during the golden age of Hollywood. It's a little something called aspect ratio. That's the ratio of the movie screen's width to its height. Back in 1932, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, the folks who give out the Oscars, established a standard aspect ratio of 4:3, which looks like this. Also known as the Academy aperture, this ratio isn't a square, but it's closer to a square than we're used to these days. That's because most movies we see today are shot in an aspect ratio of 16:9, which looks like this. That's more like it. We often call this widescreen, and so much film and TV is shot at this ratio that most new screens are built to fit it. But those are just two possible aspect ratios. Back in the 1950s, some filmmakers experimented with an extreme widescreen ratio called Cinerama. This process involved shooting a film with three separate synchronized cameras hooked together in an arc, and projecting it from three synchronized projectors. Weird. The screen was shaped in a similar arc, kind of wrapping itself around the audience, you know, for a real immersive experience. And the final aspect ratio of Cinerama was about 8:3, which looks like this. The most famous film shot in Cinerama was the Western epic How the West Was Won. But, as you can probably guess, this process was too expensive and complicated to achieve widespread use. It was bad for performers' necks. On the heels of Cinerama came CinemaScope. Rather than shooting with multiple cameras, CinemaScope utilized something called an anamorphic lens. This was a special lens for cameras that recorded a wider image but squeezed it laterally so that everything would fit onto standard 35mm film stock. When the film was projected, a similar lens attached to the projector would unsqueeze the image, expanding it back out and projecting it up onto the screen. The result was an impressive 2:55:1 aspect ratio. Audiences got their first taste of it in the 1953 biblical epic The Robe, and by the end of that year, every major Hollywood studio except Paramount was licensed to make CinemaScope films. Over time, the ratio was reduced to 2:35:1, and in the mid-1950s, the American film industry had almost entirely converted to shooting anamorphic widescreen films. It took some time for filmmakers to adjust to widescreen shooting. When you move from an aspect ratio of 4:3 to 16:9, that's a whole lot of extra room to fill. So what do you do with it? Well, we fill it with, like, knickknacks and stuff. Close-ups, especially of faces, became difficult to frame, while landscapes got easier. At first, widescreen films rewarded composition and long takes over editing. Filmmakers built their stories by filling the frame rather than cutting to new images. Genres like the Western, the musical, and large-scale epics all lent themselves to these kinds of world-building possibilities. In the end, the technical advancements of sound, color, and an aspect ratio that could surround the audience made the powerful Hollywood studios the center of the cinematic universe from the late 1920s to the late 1950s. It was a golden age whose echoes are felt in our films today. today. Today we learned about how the American studio system took advantage of sound film and the Great Depression to achieve global dominance. We discussed the development of color cinematography and what it meant for filmmakers and film audiences. And we examined aspect ratio and how the move to widescreen cinema affected films being made.
Cool. I was just reminded of our little earlier discussion when we were talking about aspect ratio and how the big screen experience can do what it can do for world building and stuff. Talking about Blade Runner and those types of films, how we could still go to see them for a big widescreen event where you can see a lot of stuff around. Were any other things were interesting in that crash course? They go pretty fast, huh?
Yeah, they speak.
It doesn't.
At one point you're
you
like,
just fed up. You're not decoding anymore. Yeah. Well, you can go to the slides, I guess, because he tells what's on the slides pretty well. Another interesting business thing is the moment at which the vertically integrated movie businesses, which production studios owned their own exhibition chains, so that RKO would produce a picture and then guaranteed could put it in every RKO movie theater. So that's an interesting moment in electronic media history, because Congress was moved to break that up, and that went on until the 1990s even, where even the television networks were not allowed to own the companies that actually produced the shows for them, because the television networks were distributors, and you couldn't, as a distributor, you couldn't be in the same business entity as a producer. So that rule that they created to basically what was happening was that you couldn't rival the studios. The big studios, MGM, so on and so forth, 20th Century Fox, and because you could produce a film, but you couldn't get it in a movie theater unless they decided they would put it in one of their movie theaters. So you were trying to compete with them in production, but they would not allow you, into their movie theaters. So they could squeeze anybody out who wasn't part of their world, their oligopoly, And so at that time, they were forced to split up. And remember, NBC was forced to split up because it was too strong. So there's a long history in electronic media of splitting up big companies in order to, allow smaller companies the chance to compete or to enter. So a lot of people look at Facebook or Google now and say, well, how long until they're actually split up, because they're so dominant. So that's pretty interesting too. Cool. Well, I'm inclined to say let's knock off early today, because that's the amount of stuff we wanted to cover today. So next class, let's look over the quiz results and another topic, and let's look at a few more actual clips of movies instead of just a guy talking as fast as he possibly can about it.
he wants to get within the 10 minutes.
It's part of the joke, I think. It's a whole PBS online series, and I think the way they figure it is, how do we consume this? It's not television, so if we do want to hear something again, we can always just easily jump back in and play it again. So I think it's conceived of and made for online consumption. No one would want to watch that on TV. No one really wants to watch it in a class, but
I think
you get through a lot.
They should have divide this into
a few. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
Because it's like he's running to tell everything he wants in 10 minutes, but you cannot, it's too busy. Even when they cut, one cut is right after the other one. He doesn't stop, and I'm like, seriously.
Yeah, some people like it. I can handle it because I like getting all the information. But there's if you're interested, look on Netflix. I have to look up the name of it, but there's a 12-hour documentary on the history of movies by a Scottish academic. So all the way through, he's talking about, then there was the close-up, and it's like a half an hour before you get from one thing to another. It's like the complete opposite. It's so
but
lengthy,
slow.
But these films are so beautiful and so amazing that it would be fun to see, more than a half second of Dorothy and the Munchkins or something. So we'll see what we can do. All right. But anyway, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it at this point. So maybe see you on Thursday.